With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today. Simply go to tntradio.live. Matt Ehret and Connecting the Dots on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we're back for our second hour, where I'm very happy to be joined by my good friend Alex Krainer, who is an impeccable analyst, geohistorian. He is a hedge fund manager on top of it, so he's been in the thick of things, and he has a fantastic Substack called TrendCompass, which I invite everybody to go and subscribe to immediately. Alex has been somebody who has had his finger on the pulse for a long time, with a really sharp understanding or appreciation of the contours of history when he goes into his current analysis. So today, I would like to say a few words, or just get Alex's thoughts on some of the frontline developments in the Middle East, as well as on the Ukraine front, two zones that are both dancing with nuclear war unless saner heads do prevail, which God willing, humanity prevails through this insanity. Alex, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Good to be with you, Matt.
Great. I know that you got some visual issues that may come and go, so I'm sure the sound at the very least is going to prevail.
It's okay. I have a special visual effects for anybody who is watching. In addition to, I don't know if you can tell, but there's a special visual effect that I
see a certain smokiness. I don't have to call a fire department, right? All right, for those listening, that was a hot beverage very close to the camera that made it seem like Alex was in a building on fire. I was getting a bit worried. Alex, you have there's a lot to talk about. So you recently wrote a fantastic little piece called "What NATO Learned in Ukraine." You had a little anecdotal contribution as well within it regarding your observations and encounter a little bit during a presentation by Kurt Volker, the U.S. ambassador or former U.S. ambassador to NATO and special representative for the Ukraine negotiations, who was giving a little lesson to his audience of what NATO has learned from this whole strange debacle in Ukraine. What can you say NATO has learned from what an expert like Kurt Volker has had to say?
So, in all honesty, I couldn't tell. I was invited to this. It was last week, and the title of the talk was "What We Learned in Ukraine." And Kurt Volker was a U.S. ambassador to NATO, and he was the U.S. representative in certain Ukraine negotiations, and so he has all these very important titles in his CV. And I thought I would love to hear straight from the horse's mouth what they learned in Ukraine. And the whole entire talk was basically a rehash of all the talking points that we've heard a million times over the last 2 years. And so nothing at all. I've observed that Americans, Kurt Volker is American, from Pittsburgh. Americans tend to be very good at delivering presentations. They come prepared. The whole thing flows really well. It's well delivered. It's engaging. It's easy to sit through 20-25 minutes of the man's presentation. But then, there was a Q&A session after that. And I was, if not the first, I was second or third to raise my hand. And I was going to ask a question. Now, okay, for your viewers, listeners to appreciate this, I live in the Principality of Monaco. Monaco is not a democracy. It's a principality. The sovereign is Prince Albert. He runs the place. And Kurt Volker was, officially his guest in the Principality. And so because Prince Albert was there in the audience as well, I wasn't going to, start some kind of a controversial back and forth to embarrass Mr. Volker. But since during his presentation, he did mention that, now that the House of Representatives went to the Republicans, and, the funding for Ukraine is maybe subject to political haggling in the United States and the US Congress, then it's the European Union is going to step up and pick up the tab, because, we have to continue supporting Ukraine all the way for as long as it takes and give them everything they need. That's
right.
That's what's that's what Volker was saying. And so what I was gonna ask is, because just in the several days before his presentation, we had Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of Germany, who said that Germany would dramatically increase their financial and military aid to Ukraine, practically doubling it. And then a day or two later, we had a confirmation out of Ukraine that that it was the Ukrainians who blew up the German Nord Stream pipelines, which was an essential industrial piece of infrastructure of huge importance for the German economy. So my question to Volker was going to be, well, now that we know that the Ukrainians blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, do you think that this might jeopardize German aid to Ukraine? Of course, nobody buys the story about the Ukrainian pirates of the Baltic somehow blowing up
everyone has read Seymour Hersh's thesis. Everyone, I mean, so it's not a mystery that who really did it. But at the same time, you brought up, the official story is Ukrainians. Okay.
Exactly. It's just so obvious and so silly. But I thought, it would be worth asking that question just to see him squirm a little bit and see what he might come up with. But the really well delivered, engaging presentation completely deteriorated in the Q&A session. He took 3 friendly questions from the audience, which I know at least one, because I know the person who asked. She used to work for the U.S. military in Afghanistan and Iraq. The woman lives in Monaco, but I know her. I know what she did, and she was the 3rd friendly question. And Volker was giving these very long, very rambling replies. And then after the 3rd question, and the woman with the microphone came to me and she said, "You're on right next after this one." And then after he finished the answer to the 3rd question, they stopped the session. They invited us to the cocktail party that was organized after that, and so I never got to ask the question. I think it was deliberate. I think that the whole narrative is so patently, so obviously false and incoherent that they probably couldn't risk taking any questions from people they didn't know, and any questions that they didn't know in advance. But it wasn't.
Well, you definitely built up a reputation for yourself, Alex, in all fairness, that I think that when you enter a room like that, probably somebody had some alarms that went off and made sure that you were stalled as much as possible. But I think that what you were able to bring back out of that as an observation of the self-delusion that Volker represents is clinically very interesting. I think that clinically, psychologically speaking, it's not a big surprise, but it's useful to get this hard data of the insanity of those who have been assigned a certain role based on an artificial image of what they imagine the New World Order must be, despite the fact that reality doesn't at all conform to their script of what they've been assigned to play on the great game stage. So Volker coming out saying, and I thought it was very insightful when you said, There was almost like a hypnotic technique he used by telling people, well, look, ignore the day-to-day news coverage. It'll just demoralize you. That's important. What's really important is that Ukraine is still a strong, sovereign democracy and thus should merit our full support. And I feel like it's somewhat similar as a technique that I've heard again and again from these technocrats as an art of sophistry that's been used in things like, man-made climate change, where you've heard people say, oh, only foolish, unsophisticated idiots believe what their senses are telling them. And you think it's getting cold in winter, and you think that it's still really chilly when you're digging your car out of the snow. But in reality, the reality is the experts say that there, and then fill in the blank, right? And thus we should conform all of our life to this idealized image of what some computer models or game theoreticians have said the future outcome must be, even if it means massively shutting down industrial civilization and killing ourselves. If that means supporting the democracy, go for it. If it means stopping the climate from changing, okay, that's okay. So it's a very similar hypnotic spell. I enjoyed that you noted that Volcker was still using that.
Yes, absolutely. But I think there's so much to read into all that. It's almost surreal how delusional they are. But I think that they are, they're probably a squad, a team, a group of people who are running this show and who have a lot at stake in winning. They cannot accept losing. And they're never going to change their mind. We're never going to change their mind. It doesn't matter what the reality is. It doesn't matter what the arguments are. But I think that what actually happens is that at a given point in time, when the thing breaks, then there's probably going to be some kind of a purge, and a different squad is going to walk in, who is going to be a bit more realistic, who is going to come in knowing that they have to sit across the table with the Russians and that they have to hack out a deal. Because, after all, all wars finish at a negotiating table. Regardless of how much bloodshed or how little bloodshed happens in between, the parties have to come together and iron out some kind of an agreement. And so that's going to have to happen. And probably, people like Kurt Volker and, Victoria Nuland and Antony Blinken, they're not going to be part of that. It's going to be
Would you sort of see them as sort of
the
would you sort of see this cast of characters kind of like one would see Lloyd George and Neville Chamberlain and Oswald Mosley in the British High Command pro-Nazi back in the 1930s? Would that be sort of the same sort of thing, where iced out in favor of a more rationalistic grouping within the oligarchy who realized they overplayed their hand and had to abort?
Yes, exactly. I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying that's how it usually goes, and that's probably a realistic explanation for people who are still in charge being completely and totally delusional. Because it could be you might find yourself very discouraged there, that they have learned nothing, that they just went through almost 2 years of war, that they sacrificed more than 500,000 lives, that they ended up with Ukraine that is completely devastated, which was the most important chess piece in their geopolitical chessboard, and that they have learned nothing. That could be really disheartening. But I think that there are other people who are not quite as delusional, and so it's just going to be a change in the management structure. That's what's going to happen. And you're right. That's how it's been through history, and that's how it's going to be this time around as well. But I'm afraid that probably Russia's terms are going to be very difficult for any team to accept, because Russia at this point has no reason to trust their Western counterparts at all, and they have no reason to compromise about any of their political and geopolitical objectives at all.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's pick this thread back up after a short break. This has been TNT Radio Connecting the Dots.
TNT Radio's Rick Munn.
I'm looking also at South Africa in terms of Eskom, which is a company that we have talked about a lot here. That's the South African electricity provider. Eskom has posted a massive 24 billion rand loss for 2022-2023 financial year, exacerbated by a huge escalation in load shedding, which is basically blackouts, for want of a better expression, mounting municipal debt and skyrocketing losses due to criminal activity. That's both within the company, I would say, and outside of the company. The group presented its first full year financials for the 12 months ending 31st of March on Tuesday. It said the year was characterised by a significant deterioration of performance, including a steep decline in energy availability of 56%, down from 62%. So half the country are having difficulty getting any electricity at all, and most places are undergoing what's called load shedding, which means for up to 10 hours per day you could be disconnected from the electricity supply in South Africa.
Locked and loaded with Rick Munn on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Affordable housing, we can build that. Sustainable housing, we can build that. At MIT Modular, we understand the importance of housing for all and the importance of design, cost, and functionality. Our goal is to meet the needs of our growing population by converting shipping containers to livable units. If you're like-minded and in a position to invest in something meaningful and life-changing, we want to hear from you. We are a team of professional architects, engineers, and financial and tax experts dedicated to offering unique solutions that provide a brighter future. Our Opportunity Zone Fund offers investors both real estate and operating business diversification, 5-year tax deferral on capital gains, annual tax benefits, and ultimately tax-free appreciation potential. There are opportunity zones all over America. If you're interested in learning more about our services, need affordable housing, or want to participate in creating a new vision for tomorrow, give us a call in the U.S. on 385-985-5702 or read more at mitmodular.com. MIT Modular. We can build that.
Anticipate potential delays for the morning commute. In other news, a recent government report on prescription drug pricing points to corporate
Freedom of the press is about your right to know.
What are you talking about, man? Look at this stacks.
It's about your right to be informed. Your right to access all types of information keeps us free as a nation.
No.
Today, there are real threats to press freedom.
Reaching residential areas by...
And your right to know about the world around us.
Look.
Some threats are obvious, some are easy to miss, but they all put our way of life at risk. We must defend against all of these threats, no matter what kind of news is important to you.
Justified putting American troops in harm's way?
That's a great question.
We must protect our right to know before it's too late. Understand the threats. ProtectPressFreedom.org.
The human mind is like a computer. No matter how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information fed into it.
That's a campaign promise.
Tell us the truth. Tell us the truth.
We mandate that the truth be told.
You're hearing it.
TNT.
All right, we're back with Connecting the Dots. I'm here with Alex Krainer, where we have been discussing some of the breaking developments around Ukraine, or at least not the breaking developments, more the insanity of oligarchism as far as misreading reality again and again and again. Currently, Zelensky's advisor, David Arakamia, I can't even pronounce his name. He was a representative of the Servant of the People faction in Ukraine, gave an interview admitting that the war could have ended last year if they had agreed to simply signing up to a promise of neutrality, as Putin had repeatedly requested again and again and again. He was, of course, not apologetic, but rather happy that they didn't do that because now they have their freedom and sovereignty and dignity intact. We're also at the 10-year anniversary of the Maidan that was put into motion in November 2013, in large measure, that resulted in this U.S. State Department-led coup and the revival or amplification of a neo-Nazi ideology that had been sort of incubating since World War II that's been brought back into play. We still see it very, very actively as a force of destruction. So we have a lot of embarrassing things coming through. It's harder and harder to ignore the disasters of Zelensky, of the entire decision to try to pick a fight with Russia. I sort of get a sense of a little bit of the promises that were made to Saakashvili in 2008, where he was given promises that the neocons would support him if he picked a fight with Russia over South Ossetia. That didn't really go the way he had hoped. I think that there's a sort of sense that the plan is not working out. Even the Wall Street Journal is now saying our expectations of Ukrainian victory and Russian defeat have to be reconceptualized. So even mainstream media outlets are putting out this messaging, I think, trying to prepare the groundwork for a possible shifting of gears. The money promised to Zelensky by Biden doesn't seem to be forthcoming. So what do you think? Do you think that they are really aborting the Ukraine project now, or is there an attempt, and are they putting it all into the support of Israel operation, or are they trying to open up a two-front attack against the oppositions to the depopulation agenda, Russia, China, and beyond?
No, I don't think they're giving up, but the game is shifting, and this is another thing that Volker mentioned. He mentioned that the strategic thinking is shifting towards regarding the Black Sea as the important strategic area rather than Ukraine. But I would just go back to something you said. You mentioned it was a State Department run coup in Ukraine. I looked into it, and it's not quite that easy. We obviously had the involvement of Victoria Nuland and various other actors, but reading the whole thing, it seems that the Obama State Department was not really interested in Ukraine all that much. And so the whole thing started for reasons that I'm not sure why then exactly, but on 26 September 2013, it was Carl Gershman of the National Endowment for Democracy who published an op-ed in, I think, the Washington Post. And in that op-ed, he was saying, well, okay, now we have to definitely push Ukraine into European integrations. They have to become a member of the EU and a member of NATO, and the Obama administration has to, go in that direction. And then then very close after that, we had, I think, the U.S. Justice Department, who launched an extradition request against one of the Ukrainian oligarchs in Vienna, who was, his name escapes me right now. Maybe it was Leonid Kravchuk. No, it was some. Well, anyway, they launched an extradition request against this person who was a key political supporter to President Yanukovych. And then they kind of blackmailed. Then, like 2 days after that, Nuland went to Kiev and had a meeting with Yanukovych. And then she came out of that meeting and she said, like, well, I can announce that Ukraine has chosen Europe. But then throughout the succeeding events, because this was dragging on for months, now is 10 years since the Euromaidan demonstrations started, but the coup was in February, 22 February 2014. So it took a few months. But throughout the whole time, it seems that they had to kind of cajole the Obama administration to help out and to participate. and that Obama wasn't very, very interested because they clearly saw the risk of World War III breaking out, and Obama was actually saying to some people there, "Don't get me into a war." And then, Obama determined that Russia had how did he word it exactly? The overwhelming military escalation dominance, so that there was no point going to war with Russia. And then you had. Apart from Newland and Gershman, you had also former NATO head of the NATO in Europe, General Philip Breedlove, who got busted for this flurry of lobbying and emails that he was sending around, trying to get Colin Powell and Wesley Clark to put pressure on Obama to come to Ukraine's aid militarily. And well, it didn't work. It didn't work because, again, Obama thought that it wasn't a winnable situation, and that it had a risk of escalating into World War III. So I think this is very, very interesting, because I think ultimately we're going to need to know who cooked this whole soup up. And it doesn't seem that it came from President Obama. It came from these neocon networks that are, some of them in Washington, D.C., but many of them in Europe, in the structures of NATO, in Sweden, in, Anders Aslund, Carl Bildt was up to his eyeballs in pressuring the Kiev junta into triggering the anti-terror operation after the coup. And so it seems to me that we're talking about officials who are not necessarily state actors, but are very influential and can influence policy. Anyway, going back to the Black Sea.
This is what I just quick moment, just to say, this is what I really appreciate about you, Alex, is that you have a sensitivity to the fact that there is this structure. We don't know all the details of the moving parts, but you know that there is this structure that is apart from and above nation states, which will use and will infiltrate institutions within nation states, but it's not the same thing. And I just made a mistake by just overly simplistically labeling that Operation State Department. See, even I do it too. But it's important to train the mind to always differentiate, well, what is it within the intelligence agencies which is working against the interests of the nation? Because if we hold on to the popular belief that nations are the sole cause of why things happen now or throughout history, why is there a war in the Middle East? Israel is causing this, Palestine is causing it. Why was there World War II? Germany wanted this. And it's like, no, that is for stupid people. That has been baked into our dumbed down education system and textbooks. But the reality is there are oligarchical systems that will infiltrate and contaminate everything to induce nations to work against their own self-interest based on certain ideological, cultish, synthetic beliefs that are put there, but that destroy the people and the actual well-being of that nation. Did America benefit by globalization? Well, the so-called elites got a lot of money for it. But did the people or the nation as a whole benefit? No, it's weaker today on the verge of collapse. So maybe that was actually a desired outcome. And what you're doing by just mapping out and helping people to appreciate this is again just why I really appreciate your 2 cents in your analysis. So yeah, go on. I'm sorry.
Well, no, thank you very much, Matthew. I appreciate that. Well, yeah, because I think it's extremely important for us to understand it, because as you said, the propaganda machine is working overtime to make us think that, Russia bad, China bad, United States bad, whoever, depending on which side of the equation you take. But, no nation is a monolith, and even the United States is not a monolith. And we had many examples of this happening. I think maybe you'll recall in 2019, towards the end of Trump's term, there was this incident where I think in June 2019, the Iranians downed a drone over the Straits of Hormuz. And then there was this hysteric pressure being built up for Trump to go in and to launch a missile and bombing attack against Iran, which would have triggered probably a war, an escalation that couldn't be controlled anymore. And well, had Trump pulled the trigger, it would have been, it would have seemed like the United States responding. But what we learned was that the lobbying pressure to push Trump into that war was coming from the British embassy in Washington. The ambassador at the time was Sir Kim Darroch. Okay. And we learned about this because the Anonymous afterwards, I think October, November that year, Anonymous leaked the cables that were going back and forth between the British embassy in Washington and London, a foreign office. And the British diplomats were talking about how Trump was reluctant, but that they could kind of pressure him into pulling the trigger by quote unquote flooding the zone around him, of like influencing all of his advisors. The media did their work because the media, kind of built up again this Iran demonizing hysteria again, and what they did to us and our drone and so on and so forth. But at that point, Trump did resist it, and he didn't pull the trigger. But then there was a different case where
he fired Ambassador Darroch as well, right? That was one of the unprecedented action when he kicked him out. Not fired him, but he said basically, get out. You're not welcome here anymore.
Yeah, Darroch had to go when the cables were leaked out. It was such a scandal that Kim Darroch had to be changed. The Foreign Office had to recall him and send a different ambassador. But because it's Britain, British tracks are always white, and we never talk about them. We talk about Russia, we talk about China, we talk about Iran, we can talk about anybody, but even Israel, but the Brits you cannot touch. And practically anything that's discussed about the British lobbying and the British influence in the United States is very, very carefully airbrushed so that they never appear as a factor. And then when things happen and things go wrong, then the Brits themselves will say like, oh, well, we just went along with the American leadership. We're just being a dependable partner like we always are. And look what we've done. And this is terrible. The Americans are bad. They mess up everything they touch. And, but, they never learn. They're always there on the side. And I always say that for people who are old enough to remember Mad Max 3, the real relationship between the United States and Britain is the Master Blaster relationship, the big
Beyond Thunderdome, right?
Remember the big muscular giant who had this little old decrepit dwarf on his back,
right?
The little decrepit dwarf is actually directing him to do things, while the muscular giant just goes and smashes things and beats people up, but doesn't really know why.
That's perfect. No, it really is this dumb giant that people are quick to feel the burn of the muscular giant that's just smashing like the Hulk, and they don't forget that this thing is being foreign directed by an agency that understands that the real strength is in the power of lies, the power of controlling the illusions, the ideologies that animate a program, that animate a system to work against itself. And Master Blaster, the big, it's not the Master Blaster, but the big tool ended up meeting a very, very unfortunate end in that Mad Max story. But I
don't know who said it exactly, but as one of the British diplomats or officials at the time when this special relationship was being forged, they formulated it as American brawn, British brain, American brawn. That's that's how the foreign policy around the world is going to be run.
Anybody who's
British brain and American brawn.
That's the thing. That's the key. And anybody who's confused right now about the misinformation, who should they give their anger to? Is it China the bad guy? Is it Russia the bad guy? Should I hate Israel? Maybe I should hate the Islamists. Maybe I should hate Venezuela. There's so many different degrees of misinformation. Maybe it's the Jews. The Jewish conspiracies coming in right now to absorb a lot of hate, like it did back in the day when Hitler was reading the Protocols of Zion, cooked up by British and Russian intelligence to convince the aristocracy that you have to clamp down on the Jews, and it gave rise. It worked pretty well at getting Nicholas II and all of these different fascist Henry Ford to push forth and support a big fascist policy. But it's like this again today. We're being played like a spell. The same formula is being used, and it's always the head of British intelligence, whether it's the evidence that justified the bombing of Iraq, in the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. That came out of 10 Downing Street. If it was Russiagate, it was Sir Richard Dearlove. Again, whatever it is, you'll scratch it, you'll find British intelligence. And that'll set the stage for the next segment, where we're going to get into the Middle East and some of the influences that aren't even in the Middle East playing all sides after a short break.
With his expert analysis and opinion, this is TNT Radio's Timothy Shea.
I've been in and around politics for over 50 years, so it takes a lot to surprise me, much less shock me. But I was shocked. Not that so many Argentines voted for Javier Milei, but that the Peronist powers that be allowed him to win the election. And the thing that made me the happiest for my Argentine friends is the video that Milei put out, where he went down the row of a magnetic board that had all the Argentine government ministries listed, and all the irrelevant ones, pulled them off the magnetic board over his shoulder. They're gone, no more. That's exactly what we need to have happen here in the United States. We need Donald Trump back in January of 2025 to streamline our government. We need to move the Department of the Interior actually out into the interior. We need to move the Department of Agriculture to where we commit agriculture. And most importantly, we need to defund and disband FBI and distribute its law enforcement functions to other agencies that have their own law enforcement capability already stood up. Can't have Donald Trump back fast enough. I'm glad that Milei is going to make Argentina great again. We need Donald Trump here to make America great again. From MAGAInstitute.com, this is Timothy Shea for TNT Radio.
Around here, bushfire is just a part of life. We've been through it before, and we'll get through it again. The people here all look out for each other. We're a community that does its bit to plan and prepare, to keep everyone safe. We live with bushfire, so we live bushfire ready.
TNT Radio. This is Connecting the Dots with Matt Ehret on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we are back with Alex Krainer, where we have been analyzing the role of the smelly British hand behind everything bad, it seems, throughout modern history and into our current age. We discussed some elements of Ukraine, internal manipulations inside of the United States, the importance of mapping out the deep state and its techniques of sophistry to get us to misfire our judgment upon those who do plot our demise, so that we actually miss the hand that should be right in front of us. And I'm here in Canada. Most people in Canada think that we're like a constitutional democracy. I got to say, like, the sensitivity to British, we see the Queen everywhere, on our money, soon the King. There's always this confirmation that there's this monarchical structure, but there's a total delusion of what's right in front of our face, regardless of the fact that there's a privy council office, there's lieutenant governors unelected, the governor general signing off and giving royal assent to anything which becomes law. There's deputy governors or deputy ministers unelected. It's a whole baked in deep state structure, and most people have been hypnotized to think, yeah, we're a freedom loving democracy, like Ukraine. It's weird, but it's important to have people like you who can break the spell and showcase that no, we are being manipulated. We can merit democracy and sovereignty, but that role requires certain changes in our attitude and our thinking. Now, we talked about a lot of things. I want to end on a discussion quickly about your thoughts on some of the developments in the Middle East. And one thing that I noted not that long ago is that the Electronic Intifada, great website, had publicized certain documents showcasing, Kit Clarenberg from Gray Zone oversaw this, that the Adam Smith International was training the Palestinian Authority and the Syria police, the Free Syrian Army as well. But the Palestinian Authority were being trained by a director named Daniel Pimlott, David Robson, interfacing with the U.S. military, who was coordinating with Israel to train the Palestinian Authority. On the one hand, on the other hand, you have things like, the U.S. and Israel both working together. But when I say Israel, I'm specifically speaking of a faction within Israel to create Hamas, right? That is tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. So, and itself is tied to British intelligence and Freemasonic intrigue many, many decades ago. So I know that you've written a lot about this. You recently wrote something on the West sails into a hurricane of consequences in the Middle East. Was October 7th what we've been told, or was it an inside job that was pre-planned by actors outside of that theater of action?
Yes, Matthew, my sense is that that's what happened, that it was a pre-planned job by actors who are outside. I think that Netanyahu and his cabinet were ripe, low fruit for the picking. So, triggering them was going to be really easy, right? They're already there. They want to do this. Netanyahu is in a fight for his political and maybe physical life. And so this comes as a manna from heaven to him. On the other hand, we have Hamas, which, again, I would caution against thinking Hamas bad, as if it were a monolith of bad. We have Hamas leadership who are, some of them living in the UK, Britain, some of them living in Doha, Qatar, some of them in the West Bank, all in very, very posh, privileged positions. I think, and there was an estimate that the combined leadership of Hamas are billionaires worth $11 billion. Okay, they travel around on private jets, enjoy their time at five-star resorts around the world, and they are in very, very close contact with these other deep state structures associated with Israel, with the UK, with Qatar, and so forth. So, who is the biggest supporter of Hamas in the world? Because if you go out on the street and you say "Free Palestine," you might get arrested in Germany or other Western European countries. If you say "From the river to the sea," you could have your Facebook, whatever accounts completely suspended. But Qatar can give hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas, and that's all cool. Qatar has been rewarded by all this by massive arms transfers from England. They sold them fighter jets. They gave them 2 bases in north of England to train with the British pilots. And not only that, but after the 7th October, UBS, or was it Credit Suisse? I forget now. One of the big, it was either UBS or Credit Suisse, gave $8 or $9 billion credit to Qatar Talk about punishment for being a Hamas supporter. So we're obviously not dealing with some kind of a straight up game where, one bad monolith hit out at the other bad monolith, and then the two bad monoliths went to war, and the badder, stronger monolith is crushing the weaker one. That's what's happening at the human level. And so, we see these really unspeakable atrocities being wreaked on the Ukrainian, on the Palestinian population. What are we at? 20,000 casualties and 8,000 children. I honestly never thought that I would live to see this. I thought those eras were behind us, but apparently not. At the same time, this, I think, was probably arranged between, probably top leadership of Hamas, who activated some militant units, other militant units, or some commander, somebody in Israel made sure that, the pilots didn't know who they were going to, they sent pilots in helicopters, and they sent tanks who didn't really know where Hamas militants were. And then they were told, just shoot at everything, just kill everybody.
Yeah.
And so,
and they've given testimonies. There's been some of the pilots of these Apache helicopters who actually gave testimony saying that, we couldn't identify who was a hostage, who was Hamas.
Yes, exactly.
And we just
so they were, so they were sent with no rules of engagement, with no clarity about who they were going against. They just saw motion and commotion, and then they were told, let's just wipe them all out. And then I think that one of the most important testimonies was this woman who was among the hostages who were taken but not yet brought back to Gaza. This was one of the early testimonies. And then she said that she was taken care of by one of these Hamas militants. And then at one moment, while there was crossfire, this Hamas militant changed his clothes and decided to turn himself in. So he took her as a human shield and went over to the Israeli side. And after he left, then they fired tank shells into the house where they were. So, if you think this one through, that particular Hamas militant was probably a double agent, who was probably part of this command and control hierarchy that orchestrated this attack, and who knew that at a certain moment in time, his role was over, and he was going to walk over to the other side, quote unquote, turn himself in. But basically, he's already part of this whole thing. And then the changing of clothing is a significant thing, because obviously if he was going to go out of there with a human shield, they had to recognize him. So, he had a set of clothes that would be able for Israeli troops to identify him as a friend and not foe. I think that was a very important testimony. So, it's difficult while emotions run high to call something a false flag. But we've seen false flags. History is chock full of false flags. And, after 30 years, 40 years, 50 years have gone by, then everybody goes oh yeah, Gulf of Tonkin, everybody knows. But at the time, nobody could have dared to mention it. I think that we need to be a bit wiser, and we need to call things by their name, even if they're wrong, even if we're wrong. Because if I'm wrong, then history will tell a different story, and I'll be proven wrong. But I think the fact that this was a false flag attack most probably changes everything. It's not just a one small fact that, oh yeah, whatever, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. No, it actually changes everything, because then we need to investigate who is responsible for this. in a completely, like the investigation track is a completely different one than if it were like an endogenous attack by evil barbaric Muslims against their Jewish victims.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not a superficial thing at all. This is like saying, the one narrative, the buildings fell, but I mean, it doesn't matter what the explanation narrative is. And it seems like the idea of a guy in a cave orchestrating this whole thing in Afghanistan is sufficient for me to just live in that mental realm. And it's like, no, but all of the questions you're going to be asking, all of the actions you're going to be authorizing will lead you to a completely different destructive outcome than if you take the time to objectively take a step back, avoid the are you with us or with the terrorist false dichotomy choice, and simply say, okay, how have we been played again and again from the Gulf of Tonkin, the murder of JFK, Vietnam, that, the Gulf of Tonkin never happened as an attack from the Viet Cong. We accepted that lie, and then we resulted in something which spiritually massacred the American people, self-mutilated, and created traumas that are still bubbling unresolved under the surface, and that are being played with by grand strategists and mass psychiatrists who like playing people from the standpoint of their bubbling, unresolved subconscious forces that have been induced to suffer traumas, right? That's how we're played. Same thing for the Cold War issue too, right? Like, why are people so ready right now to just fall right back into the Cold War profile of blaming Beijing and the Kremlin for all of our problems? Well, it's because we never resolved it. The Soviet Union melted down. We thought that we were the top dog in the world in 1992, but we never resolved all of the J. Edgar Hoover, McCarthyite, John Burke Society propaganda that was embedded in the baby boomer generation for decades. That was always there. And when the spellmasters were decided to bring it back, they could press those right buttons and induce it. So now people aren't seeing the British intelligence hand everywhere that they should see. Could be smacking them. They don't see it because they're so fixated on the Cold War bad guys that are brought back again. We only have about 4 minutes. I need to have you back on because you've said something that I think also is important about this techniques of Gladio. You brought up the how many people inside of Hamas obviously are not bad. They're authentic good people who have been pulled into something which is being influenced by billionaires in Qatar and far off realms tied to intelligence, which don't care about them at all and would like to use them, just like Israelis have been used, who are not bad people, but are being used by processes they don't understand. And I was thinking about Operation Gladio and how many people in the Red Brigades didn't know fully how unreconstructed Nazis were working with Alan Dulles, creating these terrorist organizations in the 1960s, carrying out a strategy of tension, the killing of people like Herrhausen or other political leaders. Do you want to say a quick word on that as a teaser for maybe our future discussion on some of this stuff?
Well, yeah, sure. I think that's a very important topic of discussion because this is something that's done also by these imperialistic structures of power as a matter of course to pit one group against the other. And we've seen. I think there are so many parallels between what is happening in Israel today to what has been happening in Ukraine previously. And then I lived through one of those experiences when the countries of former Yugoslavia went to war. This is when you want to rule over the people, the easiest thing to do is to divide them against one another, and then to pretend that you are there to help both secretly, and neither side knows that you are actually pitting them against the one or the other. This has been going on so long that back home, one of my elders told me that we used to have a saying: if you see two neighbors fighting, you can know for sure that one of them had an Englishman over for dinner last night. So that's the the, how do you call it, the stereotype, but we have to be careful because this is not about Englishmen. This is not about the British people. This is about the nature of governance. This is about the system of governance. That this is, what George Soros made plain in his 2021 present speech to the World Economic Forum in Davos. And this is the exact thing that Kurt Volker said in his presentation about what they didn't learn in Ukraine last week. They said, both of them, confirming that it's all about the system of governance. Mm-hmm. And so the Western imperial system of governance depends on dividing people, pitting them one against the other, and making sure everybody's fighting so that they can arrange the best deal for themselves.
Absolutely. No, that's perfectly said. Don't play the game. That's the key. Don't play the game. We're going to leave for a little break for our next segment. We're going to have Lawrence Freeman on the issue of Africa and the world.